campaigns have changed. It is no longer a traditional linear timeline. It is asymmetrical. That's a fancy word, Chuck.
I'm not sure what that meant.
I'll give you a good example. Asymmetrical just means something happening that is seemingly small and unrelated to what's happening on the political sphere impacts politics. So I'll give you a perfect example. Donald Trump is president and he's watching the NFL draft. He takes out his little phone and tweets, Shadur, what's happening to you is wrong. Those billionaires, owners are rigging the system against you or something like that. Tell your daddy I said hello. He was a great one, a Hall of Famer. Folks, that's the new paradigm. This is the new media ecosystem. That's not housing policy. That's not education policy. That's not foreign policy. It has nothing to do with it. But he sent a signal to young men in particular, NFL fans writ large. I'm watching, I'm paying attention, and he pitched the billionaire owners as the problem.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote podcast. I am super excited about this episode, not just because Mike Madrid is gone today, and he is gone today, so we're going to talk all the shit we want to about Mike Madrid, but I'm also happy because I have replaced Mike Madrid with somebody much prettier, much smarter, and much nicer. I'd like for all of you to join my friend in welcoming Maria Cardona as my co-host today, the Latino Vote podcast. Maria, welcome on board.
Thank you so much, my hermano Chuck. I am so excited to be here with you. I've loved this podcast that you're doing. And yeah, you got to do it with Mike, but what can you do? You can't win them all, right?
We've only got so, but this has already went up in scale of beauty and intelligence and nice. And we want to bring in our guest today, another Latino brother who works over at the Catalist. Welcome to the stage, Micael Frias. Hey, Micael.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you, Maria.
So as you've noticed here today, we are all Democrats and we are wanting to have a conversation without Republican Mike Madrid, who's probably at one of his vacation homes in the south of France, to figure out how us Democrats can figure out how to fix the Latino vote in the Democratic Party. Now, this has been an ongoing conversation with a lot of well-intentioned woke white people on the internet or on TV. But we're going to have a family discussion today with the family. It's a Latino Vote podcast because this is what we talk about. And we've invited Micael because he's going to act a little bit like Mike Madrid with the numbers, but with a lot more charm and way better looking because he's got all that hair. But we're going to bring Mike in because Micael just released this great report at Catalist that digs into just the numbers, the good, the bad, the ugly, the pretty. There was a lot of bad and ugly, we'll be honest there. But before we get started and before we dig into the numbers, Mike, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about your journey to Catalist, because I think you grew up in the great state of Arizona, right?
That's right. And where's Madrid from? New Mexico?
No, he's from California.
Oh, even worse. So I grew up in Arizona, the baby of 7 kids. Dad was a copper miner in the copper mining corridor of Arizona. Mom was a school teacher. Brothers served in the military. Dad served in the military. Worked in Democratic politics pretty young. I did union organizing campaigns in Ohio, then went to LA to work for a guy named Antonio Villaraigosa when he first ran for mayor.
You and Madrid have that in common, but go ahead.
Good. And then came back, worked for Napolitano as governor, then went on to be chief of staff for an Arizona member of Congress, Ann Kirkpatrick. Left there, went to Homeland Security for 5 years. And then I've been at Catalist now for 10 years. So,
10 years. What's your position at Catalist?
I am the chief executive officer.
CEO for all you mofos in the back. CEO Latino. Maria, don't you have some history with Catalist?
I do. And I am so thrilled to be doing this podcast, of course, with you, Chuck, but now with Micael, because to me, this is like coming home, full circle. I was communications director at the DNC under Terry McAuliffe for the 2002, for the 2000 cycle through 2004, when Catalist was first created. And I remember when we were talking about how we needed a data organization that was going to be consistent and constant, and it was going to be second to none, and it was going to be micro targeting to the fullest and at its best. And the very first CEO and the person who ran it was my dear friend Laura Quinn. And I remember having conversations with Laura even way back then about how important the data was going to be to Democrats as we mapped out our strategy to continue making inroads with the Latino vote. So I'm loving this, and I can't wait to hear the data. And you're right, Chuck, there's a lot of bad and ugly here, but I'm going to bring up a little bit later how I think there's not just tremendous potential here, but this isn't actually something that we have not seen before in the history of the Latino vote. So, but I'll save that for later.
Cool, because we're going to let Mike go. I mean, Mike. See, I'm used to that, but it's Mike Frias, not Mike Madrid. We're going to let Michael go here after he gets through the data because he's got a plane to catch. Yeah. He's not going to the south of France. He's probably going to some working class neighborhood somewhere. But look, Michael, for the readers and for the listeners, it's the Latino Vote podcast, and Michael Madrid goes through all the polling and all the analytics. And Michael, to your point, has been saying, well, let's wait till the Catalist data comes out. Well, boys and girls, it's out. And I don't need to know because it's a multiple page event of some of the best data and just like who voted, how they voted, compared to the history going back. Tell us a little bit, Mike. Give us what I'd call the Rocha Cliff Notes, and then kind of dig in a little bit on what you saw as a pattern through the last few cycles with the Latino vote of what your report has been telling us.
The thing where I'll start is the Latino vote is growing in population and participation, and there's competition for the Latino vote that we've never seen. So I'm going to start backwards, actually. In 2012, the Latino vote was 10% of Obama's coalition. It was only 5% of Romney's coalition. Fast forward 12 years, it is 11% of our coalition. So it grew a little bit, but it is now 9% of the Republican coalition. So that I want to start with, there is a full-on competition for Latino voters up and down the country in battleground Senate races, in battleground congressional races, and at the presidential level. So we start there. But going back, when we look at these numbers, what you obviously see is 2012 was an okay year for Democrats, Obama, with Latino voters, but Hillary Clinton still shines above any other Democratic candidate in terms of their level of support for her. They were loyal to her, they were committed, and they went strong for her. But we saw the beginning of erosion of support among Latinos. And the thing that I will caution us is we focus a lot on Latino men, but Latinas are also showing, and have shown now for 2 cycles in a row, some consistent erosion of support among for Democratic candidates. So I think that's a big piece of it. The other piece of this is the report went to great pains to show that there was not one reason why Kamala Harris lost. There was a multiple set of variables and events that came together that created a headwind that she couldn't beat, right? And so when I talk about Latinos, they're the perfect embodiment of this. Irregular voters, so those people that don't vote every single election. Then you also have young voters, the Latino electorate. Chuck, I've heard you say it time and time again, Maria, yourself. It is the youngest cohort of voters in our election. And then 3 is also we had a widening gap between men and women and their support for Democratic candidates. And so those three things started to combine with each other and really created some headwinds that I think were insurmountable for the presidential candidate, but Chuck, as you know, was not insurmountable for some Senate candidates like Gallego and Rosen in Nevada in particular, where they were able to navigate a slightly different path than a traditional Democratic path to the White House.
That's great. And I think I'm going to jump in with the first one, then I want Maria to ask the second question. Yeah. I was always wondering, Mike, tell me the difference, and me and Mike Madrid talk about this, is the difference between the way Latinos performed in battleground states compared to where the Latinos vote there was in non-battleground states. So I'm thinking of how the Latinos in Nevada and Arizona performance compared to New York and California, and speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So so we talk a lot about this in 2022. We saw that there were basically two elections happening. There's what happens in battleground states, and there's what happens everywhere else, right? So in a presidential, I call that the race to the popular vote, 50+1 across the country, and then really the race to 270 is the battleground. And so we did continue to see erosion of support, but it is much less in the battleground states. And so when you look at the drop off of voters, the Latino men in battleground states held at 48%. In non-battlegrounds, it was 47. Latino women was a little bit higher in battleground states. It was a little lower nationally in the rest of the states. So I do think you have that effect. Overall, I think the trend is still going down. The thing that I want to also step back and acknowledge, because we're having a conversation about Latino voters, is I think this is like a coming of age story for me. I grew up in Arizona politics. I had no idea when I was watching presidential campaigns in 96 and 2000, participating them in 2004. I had no idea that the Cuban vote was so small nationally. It was central to the debate about how you win because of Florida.
Yeah.
And what I want to share with people, and I think you've probably covered this, when you talk about the Latino electorate, you have to first start with this. 60% of Latinos in the United States, voting age population, are Mexican.
Yeah.
Then you throw Puerto Rican on top of that. That's another 10%. So just between Mexicans and Puerto Ricans, you have 70% of the electorate. And I think that's a really important thing to remind ourselves when we're talking about the Latino vote, because we can get into weird nooks and crannies. We could talk about Venezuelans. We could talk about, you start to dice this up. And I think it's really important to understand that there's some linked fate between all the ethnicities, but there is also competition, and it's not all the same, right? It's not a monolith, but I just think it's really important to set that background when we're talking about these Latino numbers.
I think that's a very critical point, Michael, because it does get into this whole thing about how not all Latinos are the same, and not all Latinos care about the same issues, nor do they are looking for the same thing in their politics. But we did see, and we continue to hear, and I'd love your take on this from the Catalist data, that the number one issue for Latinos, unsurprisingly, as it was the number one issue for the overall electorate, was the economy.
Yep.
And I want to talk to you in terms of how that compares with Latina voters. And I loved how you also brought that up in terms of how we have a challenge with them as well, and we can't lose sight of that fact. Do you think that Democrats did ourselves a disservice by focusing way too much on the choice issue with Latinas versus the economic issues that we all know were front and center for most everyone?
Yeah, look, I think there is a case that I believe it was after the Dobbs decision. It was the right thing to do to make sure we could ensure access to abortion everywhere. So right. as a not a strategy to win, but as hey, we need to make sure more women have protections. I think that's a yes. I think reading into it and thinking it had coattails that it would help us win an election is a thing that we have to learn as we talk about 26, which is what helps us win in 22 didn't necessarily help us win in 24. And what caused our defeat in 24 may not be the reason why we lose in 26. And so we have to disaggregate that analysis.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think we all need to really underscore that fact and take the appropriate lessons from the last cycle and not try to overlay from cycles before that.
And I think the important thing that I'll add, particularly with Latinas and Latinos, is our concept of Latinos has got to evolve, right? Yeah. Because I think we think of Latinos as the workers, the people that are actually making stuff go. But we have to remember that when we look at small businesses, startups, they're the leading over any other cohort of workers and people in America, they are starting small businesses. And these aren't just like small businesses with no big revenue. They are increasing their numbers of employees. They're profitable in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So I just think like our idea of what a Latino is has to evolve, because and the reason why I draw that connection is, yes, there is a very strong Latino worker union coalition to be built. I also think there's a strong Latino small business entrepreneur, hustle culture that is also available and circulating in our culture and our community that we also have to speak to. And I think that when I look back at the election and you try to explain some of the difference in performance, I think some of it comes down to this, like, not fully understanding the Latino community in all of its dynamism.
And so that kind of leads to another question about the data. But before we talk about the data, for all of you who listened to last week's episode that we did with Mike, when you hear Maria talk about the issues and what Latinos care about, me and Mike Madrid in the last show talked about where the money was actually spent. And as a reminder to all of you, I just pulled up my handy dandy chart. The number one issue that was spent on media advertising was an issue called immigration. Wasn't what Maria was talking about with the economics, and it wasn't abortion either. The number one issue that was money spent advertising to everyone was immigration. And that number breaks down when you separate the Democratic spend from the Republican spend. Republicans spent $730 million on advertising on immigration, and we spent $130 million on immigration advertising. So you can start to see, why did everybody think immigration was such a big deal? Why did people in Vermont or in Colorado or in Ohio care so much about immigration? Because this is what Republicans were talking about and making it an issue. If you say something long enough to people, everywhere they are, they'll start to believe it no matter what it is. I used to say growing up, if I tell everybody 15 times a day that I look like Jesus Christ, you'll start thinking, boy, that boy had a long hair back in the day and all the things.
Yeah.
But I say that to say the second issue was taxation. And then the third issue was abortion. Nowhere in there was there anybody talking about economics, right? It's these issues that would separate us. And all the Democrats were talking about was abortion. The amount spent there was $600 million by Democrats on abortion messaging, just in media, $600 million, compared to Republicans spending $20 million. So it's the opposite of the immigration spend. So what you see as a political consultant is they're using immigration, we're using abortion because they're trying to scare white women, we're trying to get white women, and these are the two issue sets. I set that to the side for both of you to have and ask my question. That's what we call on this show the Mike Madrid wind-up. And so the question is, in the data that came out, what I read, it might not have been Catalist data, it could have been New York Times using Catalist data, when it said in the top 67 majority Latino counties in America, where there's majority Latinos and the most Latinos live there, the Republicans overperform in 66 of those compared to 4 years ago. So that tells you that it's not happening in one place, and it's happening overall. Did she have enough time? Was there whatever the thing? There's all these excuses, and that's fine. But the bottom line is that we lost ground in every major place where there was Latinos. Is there something else there, Mike, that I'm not, Michael, that I'm not picking up?
And before you answer that, can I also overlay this for our audience? This is such a critical question that you're asking, Chuck, because most of, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Michael, most of the movement that happened toward Republicans actually happened outside of the battleground states in many of the bluest areas, which should be incredibly concerning to Democrats. Michael.
Great point.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Look, I think that companion piece to our report is illuminating of this, which is, I think we have been a party that has largely thought that it was on the march. And I actually think in reality, we've been a party in retreat. We have been talking to fewer and fewer people in fewer and fewer places. We just are finding our people in other places. It's like, Chuck, I bet you anywhere you travel, you can find a Whole Foods in America. And you probably do because you want to eat healthy. Like, it's possible. And I think that's what we've done. We've mapped our people in all of these places. And I think that that's the thing that we really have to be careful about, because when we're talking about appealing to a broader cohort people of voters in places, it is going to require some flexibility. It is going to require us to use our ears a little more and our mouth a little less, to just hear how they process information, hear how they experience life. And I also think it is very important at a strategist level to not reject what people are presenting as their cohort's like reception of things. So I give this example. When I was at a summit talking on a panel, I was with a fellow operative who was Black, who was running program with the Black community. I have to have ears for his view of what he saw happening. And when he says, hey, the immigration issue didn't play well in the Black community, this is how they were hearing it, I need to be like, okay, I want to hear that and understand that, not reject it and say, no, that's wrong. Are you on the team? Are you off the team? Like, because like we can't get in the position of judging voters for how they're perceiving their experience and their life. And I think that that's one of the things that I would hope that we learn from this is, as operatives, we have to be very honest and very candid with each other about what our community is saying and supporting and what they are not saying and not supporting. And I think sometimes we get in these rooms and it's a little uncomfortable to fully represent what the Latino community really is saying and feeling versus what people want them to think.
Maria?
And yeah, I just, again, want to underscore this really important point, Michael, because it wasn't just the Latino community versus, like you said, the Black community, which there was a lot of tension there. It was even the Latino community versus the Latino community.
Exactly.
Because one of the very hard lessons that we learned, and Chuck and I talked about this even in the run up to the election, was that a lot of the mixed status families with Latino voters living in these mixed status families were hearing about all of these things that the government was giving the immigrants, not just Latinos, but immigrants that had just gotten here, that, had come into these cities. We know that was a big issue. They were getting vouchers to be able to stay in hotels. They were getting work permits. Meanwhile, their mixed status brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles who have been waiting for decades to try to get some kind of legalization work permits were getting nothing. And that was not sitting well with a lot of these Latinos. And I have to say, I cannot blame them. I think that was a real issue that Democrats missed. And we completely whiffed in terms of the opportunity to try to make things right for that group of immigrants who have been here waiting for ages, working in the shadows, contributing trillions of dollars to our economy and not getting anything in return.
Yep, I completely agree.
Mike, let's talk about this. I want to get a scope for folks to understand the movement. You started your conversation talking about Obama having this great support with Latino voters.
Yep.
Then you say that escalates even more with Clinton. And I know after you're gone, me and Maria are going to talk about the history of the movement of the vote over time. And I know she wants to talk about that. And we're going to have that conversation. Me and Maria are going to have a stand along without you to come up with all the solutions.
Perfect.
But while we're still talking about the problem, you're the problem child as they are normally.
I'm the baby of 7.
I know, that's why you're the problem child, always. I'll talk about the raw movement of the numbers. Me and Mike would talk about after the 2020 elections, maybe the Latino vote moving 8 points from its historical high of where it was, I think with Clinton is what we've gauged it off of. And with folks looking at the movement of what happened in 24, that's just a piece of the story. And I feel like, and this is me kind of standing up for Mike Madrid here, I think we're just talking about this movement in 24, and there was some more movement definitely towards Republicans. But what's that look like, Mike, if you compare that and the 8 points from that? Can you safely say that overall nationally, that on average, the Latino vote has now moved 10, 12, 15 points more Republicans since Donald Trump came on the scene?
16 points.
16 points is the average probably nationwide?
Nationwide.
Because I know Mike would want to get to that point.
It was Latino support was at 70. It is all the way down to 54 nationally.
Right.
So that's astounding.
It's moved 16 points.
From 70, for all of you at home, I have the good Mike. 70, even a Mexican redneck can figure out 70 down to 54 is not no bueno, as we say in the Latino community. No bueno. We and Maria are going to talk about why it's happening and what we can do to fix it. But I think it's important for a few things that I'm hearing. And now, Mike, I want you to jump in. Here's my question on my Madrid wind-up again. Movement over a long period of time. We've also made it understanding that the movement is worse, to Maria's point, which is something we've got to deal with in states where there's no battleground elections. We're doing worse. Where actually Latinos live, because we mainly live in 5 states, Florida, Texas, New York, California, and Illinois. That's where 70% of Latinos live. There's no battleground states, and we're doing worse there than in battleground states. Now, me and Maria would say because we're competing for that vote, we're advertising, we have field operations, and we're actually fighting it out with the Republicans for the vote. That competition is good. What's happening in the other states, there's no competition, but we're losing the arc of the narrative there with no money spent. That's the problem of what the brand, quote unquote, is. Is there any piece of that, Michael, where I'm missing anything? You've had this movement, battleground, non-battlegrounds. Are there other pieces of the data that you saw? Maybe it's young people. Maybe it's old women in the suburbs. Maybe it's old men in the suburbs. Is there another piece of this with the Latino piece that you want to make sure maybe when Mike Madrid comes back, I dig into that you'd like to point out?
No, I mean, you're hitting it right on the head here. This is an erosion of support that's it's unavoidable. If you think about this election and think we narrowly lost, I am on the other side, which is we lost in every major way possible. We lost among every single cohort. We lost among record numbers among Latinos. Nationally, battleground, doesn't matter how you cut it. The New York Times piece puts this in stark illustrations about the number of counties that are triple Trump counties versus the number of counties that are triple, Democratic counties.
Say that again.
What's up?
Say that again. The triple county piece.
The triple county. So the New York
Times supported all 3 elections. Say it again.
Exactly. So for triple Dems would be Clinton, Biden, Harris, and then that was Trump, Trump, Trump. Those counties. I mean, it is jarring to see how many of these counties have moved. And then when you isolate them, the population of our counties, our triple Dem counties, is 8 million. In the triple Trump counties, it's 41 million. I mean, folks, this is what I'm talking about.
Oh my goodness.
We are not on the march. We're in retreat. We are talking to fewer and fewer people in fewer and fewer places. That's number one. Number two is I want to highlight, and I don't have the voter registration for Latinos specifically, but I will get that for you all. Look, the reality is the other signal that we got in 24 and in this report was the voter registration data. So in roughly 30 states, in 2012, we started with a 13-point registration advantage over Republicans. In 12 years, that advantage is down to 2. In 4 battleground states, in 2012, we had a 13-point advantage over Republicans. 12 years goes by, and we are behind Republican registration by 2 points. I share that with you, Chuck and Maria, because I think we can say, well, it was young people, it was irregular voters, but it makes me think their standard bearer from 2012, 2016, but 2012 to 2024 is Donald Trump. And he is not bleeding Republican registrations in battleground states. Arguably, these are the states where we have spent the most money and spent the most amount of time. And to be down 2 points in voter registration, it tells us something really important that we have to wrestle with, which is, folks, even despite that being the opposition, Trump, still we're more willing to leave the Democratic Party and join no party affiliation and hand the Republicans a registration advantage in 4 battleground states. That, to me, is the thing that is in the report but I think really has to wrestle, I think, Chuck, nicely with what you're setting up is like, what's going on, folks? Like, that's in a place where we competed. It's wide and broad and in every community.
I think that is one of the most concerning pieces writ large, right? Trends that we need to be dealing with as a party. And we need to understand something that all of us, I think, have been preaching to our party from the very beginning, which is the Latino vote. And this goes back to, again, back in 2004, and I'm completely dating myself, right? You know, I was 10 when I was communications director at the but I have always said it, and you all probably remember the legend Sergio Ben-Dixon, who was one of the first ones to do data in our community. And
God rest his soul.
Yes, exactly. He was one of the first ones to preach this, which is the Democratic Party cannot treat Latinos as a base vote because we are not. Our community swings harder, and it sounds kinky, but it's true, swings harder as a vote than any other community. And we've seen it even before 2012, right? George W. Bush was one of the first Republicans to gain lots of ground among the Latino community. Yep. But to your point, Michael, we understood why George W. Bush actually did well with Latinos. He understood Latinos. He was from Texas. He had Latinos in his family. He went to where they were. He treated them with respect and generosity and compassion and equality. He saw them. But it's baffling how our people can look at somebody like Donald Trump. And this is where, I will admit this, I struggle to understand this, but we have to. Why is it that they would believe that he is a better choice than anyone on the Democratic side? And I think that's our big challenge, to try to understand that. To your point, Michael, without judgment, and to look at the data and to look at how we're communicating. And we understand what these pieces are. And I think that we, if we really look at the data and learn these lessons, we can get the Latino vote back. I really believe that. But it's not easy to understand how some in our community can look at Donald Trump and believe he's a better choice than what the Democratic candidate was. But again, that's the difference between somebody who has been immersed in this forever and is a true believer in the Democratic Party and democratic values, and then understanding from a strategic standpoint what voters really feel and see from a candidate versus a candidate and a party versus a party.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. The thing that I'll add that I think makes the Latino vote so interesting, along with young voters, but because there's such a young population and community, I specifically want to talk about the Latinos, is I think it is hard for our community to understand that campaigns have changed. It is no longer a traditional linear timeline. It is asymmetrical. That's a fancy word, Chuck.
I'm not sure what that meant.
I'll give you a good example. Asymmetrical just means something happening that is seemingly small and unrelated to what's happening on the political sphere impacts politics. So I'll give you a perfect example. Donald Trump is president, and he's watching the NFL draft. He takes out his little phone and tweets, Shador, what's happening to you is wrong. Those billionaire owners are rigging the system against you or something like that. Tell your daddy I said hello. He was a great one, a Hall of Famer. Folks, that's the new paradigm. This is the new media ecosystem. That's not housing policy. That's not education policy. That's not foreign policy. It has nothing to do with it. But he sent a signal to young men in particular, NFL fans writ large. I'm watching, I'm paying attention. And he pitched the billionaire owners as the problem. Being a billionaire, I mean, it's just like
brilliant. It was brilliant.
You can't make this stuff up. And so I just think we need more people to understand that's the environment, the media ecosystem environment that we are inhabiting. It's not a traditional linear one, and Chuck, you and I talked about it a little bit. Gallego, was doing interesting events that were out of the ordinary, not coffees, going to boxing matches is different than what we've typically done. And it allows you to show up in a different way and not just act, but be authentic. Right. And I think that that's really important.
So, but I'm going to ask you your last question, Mike, because I know you need to get to the airport. Before I do, though, I need to recognize y'all going to talk about George Bush. I got to give my boy Mike Madrid credit. He was on that campaign. I think he has a lot to do with that piece as well. And also me and Micael have talked a lot about this alpha male stuff with folks. Like me and Mike go to the gym a lot. Me and Mike talk about fitness. We talk about family. This morning, I know we record these on Wednesday, but I might or might not have tweeted out a bicep picture of myself at the gym and said, you can be an alpha male while not being a sexist asshole and still be a Democrat all at the same time.
Amen, brother.
And I think that this is where, Elena, I'm going to really try to get into. But look, Micael, as you go out and your parting words and your linear talking or whatever the hell that thing is, I want you to give folks, Democrats, because this was my Democratic show because Mike Madrid's not here. Me and Maria's going to let you go after this question, and we're going to talk about what we think our ideas are to fix some of these problems. But kind of give me, now that you've looked at some of these numbers, your thoughts on this not being the end of the world for Democrats when it comes to the Latino vote. What do these numbers show you to where that there's a chance, if we get to work and we do the right things, to win these voters back? Because I want to get your input before me and Maria, stole all of our great pontification, if I use that word right, on what we think has been going on and fixing it. But I'll turn the floor over to you so you're not just gloom and doom. You can give us a little sugar.
Awesome. Well, look, I definitely do not think, look, I tell people all the time, I think Trump is writing a chapter in American history. He is not writing the last chapter in American history. And it's very important to operate from that perspective, because I do think at the end of the day, our hearts are in the right place, but how we're getting people and transitioning them over is not in the right place. And I think that the young voters, like focusing on them is going to be the way out, right? They were 36% of the electorate in 2024. And there's still 5 more years of that cohort that have not aged in to the voting population yet. So if I have hope, it's still around young folks. Young folks are still aspirational. Young folks are still wanting to secure economic opportunity for them and their families and themselves. I think my 2 cents is we have to introduce or reintroduce to the Democratic Party agency. It is not all about what America has gotten wrong. It is also about what America gets right, and that there are opportunities for people. And I think telling that story and emboldening young folks to see the Democratic Party as those individuals that are willing to empower that and make it possible for them, I think is way more alluring and appealing than telling them these are all the things that the programs and the bureaucracies and the dollars. That doesn't make any sense to them. But go on agency. These folks are ready and prepared to do the hard work to get ahead. We just need to give them a path and give them something to shoot for.
Cool. Well, Mike, can you tell the audience where, if you have any place you want them to check out the Catalist report or any of the stuff, where they could go and look for, give you props to your company and stuff?
Yeah. So you can go to catalyst.us/what happened 2024.
That's a great place. And look, Micael, there's no doubt Mike Madrid is going to be pissed because I didn't tell him you were coming on. And so he's going to want to have you back because he wants to ask all of the deep dive. When you started saying that there were 12 million advantage for Democrats starting in 2012, and then that went to losing 2 million and these counties, he's going to want to do a deep dive. But I knew if I had you and Mike Madrid on at the same time, I would get no mic time. And if I had Maria on, she'd at least let me talk a little bit. So I thought, we did this on person. Michael Frias, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Michael. This was terrific. Thank you.
Have a safe trip wherever you're going. Me and Maria are going to talk shit about you now.
Sounds good now. Bye.
Ciao. That was great, Chuck. That was so enlightening.
Tell me which part of that really stuck out to you. Like, there's so much there.
What stuck out to me is frankly what he ended with, which is that there is a huge opportunity for us, which you and I have both always thought, and which is why we do what we do with such passion and grit. But that we really just have to make sure that we are meeting our Latino voters where they are. And I think that was a big miss for us in this last cycle. And the other thing I would say in terms of hope that we can do this is that we've done it before, right? We did it in 2020. Again, understanding that there has been some erosion and we have to go back and make sure that instead of moving backwards, we're actually moving forward and gaining more ground than losing more ground. But it does tell me that clearly there is an advantage with the Democratic Party for Latinos that we have to take advantage of and make sure that we communicate that. And part of the lesson of this election, and you've been talking about this for a long time, as have I, is that we didn't show up in the places where our voters were. And one of the things that I think is critical that Micael said that I believe in, but we can't rest our laurels on this, Chuck, and I'm a little bit concerned about this, is that I don't believe that Donald Trump, I think that Donald Trump for the Republican Party is lightning in a bottle, meaning that I don't think that there's anyone right now, at least, that can replicate what Donald Trump has done with the electorate writ large, not just with the Latino voters, but with everyone. I think he has whatever it is that he has. Some of it is Teflon. Some of it is, this authenticity that people see. Some of it is, just the crassness with which he talks that people admire. But I don't think anyone else in the Republican Party can get away with what he's gotten away with. And so to me, that says that that's another opportunity. But again, we can't assume that. We have to focus on what we bring, our values, our policies, but to translate, to Micael's point, to translate those policies into what that means for the lives of Latino voters and their families, right? How is it that we're going to give them the opportunity to live a better life and to be the person and the people that they want to be for themselves, their families, and their communities?
So a question I have for you, and I'll get into what I think the reason is and how we go forward, is that you were alluding to, I think, that George Bush got 44% of the Latino vote. Now, Donald Trump just got 48% of the Latino vote. So we've seen this before. Now, caveat for all of you fact finders out there was no internet. Most of those Latino voters back in the day were majority immigrants.
Right.
They were majority Spanish speakers. And a big difference in the electorate today, because I do this every day, is now they're second and third generation. They're majority English speakers, and they're a hell of a lot younger.
Right.
And you add the internet on that, and I'd say the bifurcation or the fraction of media inputs we're used to back when me and Maria were young. I won't put her in my old category, but I'll say when I was young, there was only 3 TV channels. And if the president was on, he was on all 3, and your night was screwed. But there's not like that no more. I keep talking to Ebony about how she watches TV and scrolls on her phone looking at shopping bags and shoes all the time at the same time. She says, I'm multitasking, but I think that's probably whatever every 34-year-old woman's probably doing who's watching TV and scrolling. My question is this. I think you were involved in the party during those George Bush years. After he gets 44% Latino vote, was there any kind of reckoning within the party of we got to do something with Latinos? And can you tell us or give us any examples of things we should be looking at?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is the question, Chuck, because what we did in terms of the deep dive and the reckoning is similar. Obviously the tools weren't as sophisticated as what we have now, but we did do as much of a deep dive as we could have back then with the tools that we had and the technology that we had and understanding what happened where, when, and why. And it ultimately comes down to the very simple understanding, and it's what Micael and what you and I have said, which is George W. Bush and his campaign, they went and they met Latinos where they were. In fact, one of the big things that Sergio and I did as we, went around and did like a tour afterward with data, with focus groups, with surveys and polls in terms of why was it that Latinos liked George W. Bush, And the answer was that he would go and he met them. He and his family and his campaign would meet them where they are. What did that mean back then? He would go to baptisms. He would go to quinceañeras. He would go to weddings, right? He would go to family barbecues in the parks where our people love to go and celebrate family gatherings. And again, it was simple. He went where Latinos were. He met them. He didn't expect for them to come to him. He didn't expect for them to be able to understand the messaging if it was, 30,000 feet high. No, he went to where they were. He had coffee with them. He had a, asado with them and their family. And this to me translates to what Donald Trump did in this past election. And Micael talked about it. His tweet about the NFL, that's meeting Latinos and frankly, other voters where they are. We have to do the same thing with the media and platforms that exist now. We have to go and meet Latinos where they are. We have to go to Discord. We have to be on Twitch. We have to be on these shopping channels, like you said. We have to be on the Instas and the TikToks. We have to go to gatherings where they are. We have to go to NASCAR and Monster Jam and, all of these other things that before were like, well, that's not really our voters. That's where I think we get into trouble thinking, well, those aren't necessarily our voters, because Trump went everywhere to everyone. And that was one of the things I think that we really missed an opportunity. And here's one other thing I would say, and I read this in Playbook this morning, and I think you'll agree with me. Donald Trump has now become the most media accessible president in history, meaning that he, has had these open media availabilities, letting reporters ask him any type of question that they want. And sure, he lies and he gaslights and he gives misinformation and disinformation, from here to eternity. But he is seen as being accessible and having those conversations. We need to do the same thing. And there's a big contrast now between that and all the crap we're hearing about, President Biden and what happened during that campaign.
I think you're so right on that. And what does it mean when Maria says showing up? Let me give you a few examples in modern days. If the big thing for y'all to take away with the Latino vote, we know you're a bunch of Latino nerds listening. That's why we love you, is Latinos in 5 states make up 70% of the population. Those Latinos in Florida, Texas, New York, California, and Illinois never heard from the Democratic Party unless there was some kind of local election happening in their community. And if there was, and if you look at that compared to the battleground states, this is not me saying that you can't do apples and oranges. I'm talking about how we talk to Latinos. From the way that the modern campaign has evolved from what Maria Cardona just talked about, because we are the party of smart people. We're the party of analytics scientists, data scientists, master's degrees, policy wonks. This is part of our problem, and I'm going to get to this, is that we used to run campaigns where we went to a neighborhood, and we went to a neighborhood that was heavily Latino, and we may get there late. We may only be there the last 4 weeks doing GOTV, but we'd knock on every door because that was a base precinct. Well, now we have micro-targeting, modeling, algorithms, and ad testing. Now, all of those things sound foreign to all of you, but all of those things eliminate more and more Latinos out of who we talk to, even when we're competing for those votes. Because Democrats who are too cute plus two, meaning we know the exact same way or the exact way to talk to Maria Cardona on her streaming device and Chuck Rocha on his network TV football, because we are two Democrats, they know how to advertise to us. But when your average age of your electorate's 29 and you're coming of age and you're not a regular voter, you're more of an infrequent voter, and you don't have TV, you only have streaming and mobile devices, you become harder and harder to, Maria's point, show up to talk to. It's not that our message is wrong. It's not that we don't actually show up. They have no idea who we are, what we stand for, because they've never had a conversation with us. Mm-hmm. They don't know that we care about their student loans, or we care about their grandmama's Social Security, or we care about regular things like the environment, water, and air that they truly care about, because they tell us this in focus groups when we can get them clutched together to have a conversation. but they know Donald Trump. They know it because of this thing that's the social media and the peer-to-peer things. Maria's right. In every election I've ever worked in, nobody has ever performed who's a Republican as much as him in any of these categories because he is an anomaly. But he does know what he's doing because he centers his messaging, because he knows the Republicans are with him, but he needs to get enough of the Democrat-thinking voters, a la Democrats, a la working families, by saying, the system is rigged, y'all. Y'all been getting fucked for a long time, and I'm going to be your retribution. That shit matters. And because the party that me and Maria were raised in are really cautious around things that we do when the consultants are around, we wrap our candidates in bubble wrap. We make sure that they don't do anything crazy because we want to win and do it the right way. We want to have morals. We want to have everything triple checked by lawyers. Maria's laughing because she knows that that's right. No messaging memos going out. But what we'll do is we'll send a sternly worded memo. And that's how we're going to fight back because that's what Democrats do. Well, that shit is over, boys and girls. This is when we lost every single county in America towards the Republicans other than just a handful. Democrats, listen to me well. We still have a chance to win back these voters, but we have to get a lot more commonsensical about the way that we do things. These well-intentioned, overeducated consultants who are good and who are smart, this is no beef on them. Some of my best friends, they've lost the experience of their fathers and their grandmothers and the lives that they lived, like Maria's immigrant grandparents or my immigrant grandparents, of what families actually are going through. When we're talking to them about democracy and abortion, which are super important, they're trying to figure out how to fucking pay the bills every day.
Yeah.
And how they're going to get childcare for their baby. Or like my son in Pittsburgh, who's a single dad of twins, like, who's going to watch him this evening if I work 4 hours of overtime? We've got to revert back to some more simplistic things of who the core of this party has always been, going back to LBJ or anybody else. That's where the party was rooted, in working people. We've always been the party of workers. They were always the party of the country club and the elite and the bosses. We've quit making that contrast. And I think until we get back to that, we'll fix a lot of this Latino vote problem, because these working class brown folks, men or women, care about that. How does that land with you, Maria?
I think that's exactly right, Chuck. And one other thing that I will put on top of all of that, which I think was your analysis was right on. One of the things that we also missed an opportunity to do, and I do think Kamala Harris did a lot of this, but again, to the points that we're making today, we didn't communicate that message well enough, often enough, and in the places where it really mattered, where people were. But we need to be more optimistic. We need to be more hopeful for the future, right? Our people, immigrants, are inherently optimistic. You know, not just anyone can wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to move my family to a completely different country where we don't
speak my language.
We don't speak the language. I don't have a cent to my name. It takes a certain amount of, frankly, cojones to do that, you know, and grit and heart to do that. And those are exactly the kind of people that want to hear what a country and what leaders of that country are going to do for them, and are going to make it easier to help their families live this better life that we all aspire to, and how they're going to do that. And sure, you can talk about how this other person is going to keep you from doing that, and this other person really doesn't like you or embrace you or respect you. But you have to couple that with, or frankly, lead with what your candidate or your party is going to do for this group of voters, and why that group of voters should support your candidate or your party. And that's where I think we did not connect the dots for enough Latino voters in enough of a compelling way for them to say, you know what, yes, it is the Democratic Party, and it is, you know, Kamala Harris or this candidate that's going to allow me and my family to live this better life, for me to be successful in my new business that I just launched, for my kids to be able to get an education or to, you know, have a good job, not necessarily college, right, Chuck? Not necessarily college. That is not the pathway for everyone. And frankly, it's the Democrats that have a better way towards apprenticeships, towards, you know, careers that don't necessarily need a college education. And where, frankly, these days, you can probably make a lot more money in those industries today.
Sure.
And so that's where I think our party missed an opportunity. But I think we can get there because I do believe inherently, or else we wouldn't be doing any of this, Chuck, that it is the Democratic Party and our values that will help Latino voters achieve the American dream, be successful, thrive, and give their families this better life that we all came to this country looking for.
And I think Maria's right on what she's saying. The way I interpret it when I deal with candidates is she's saying it's easy to be against Donald Trump.
Right.
It's easy to say he's crazy. He's going to get us in a war.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to take your Medicare. Mm-hmm. Republicans are going to cut your food stamps. They're going to do all these things that's going to hurt your family. What she's saying we haven't done in 12 years, which I've not heard us, is we've also said he's going to take away a woman's right for her own body. Like, that's crazy. That's right. He is nuts what he's doing. But what Maria's saying is the biggest thing y'all should take with you today. We haven't been telling voters what we're for and what we stand for. And this optimistic, we want you to build a business. We want you to be able to make more money and have more time off to have a barbecue. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have to have 3 jobs. Maybe 1 job is enough. That's our values. But Donald Trump is such a target-rich environment.
Yeah.
And it makes the eggheads in our party's head explode so much. We're like, everybody's got to hate this. This is anti-democratic. And look what he's doing to oligarchy and socialism and all these big words that rednecks like me that I grew up with have no idea. But it's easy for me to tell that redneck, we're with the workers. That dude had 14 billionaires on stage with him when they're swearing in because that's who he's with. But he wants y'all to think he's with you because he's bullshitting you because he cares about one family and it's his family. The only family he cares about, and that's a prelude to every TV commercial I'm going to make in the midterms, is Donald Trump cares about families and it's mainly his. The last thing as we wrap up here, and we've only got 10 minutes, is I would be remiss if I didn't say another thing to think about is we need more senior Latinos involved. What Maria Cardona hasn't said to you, and I'll brag on her, is that she was one of the first Latinas to ever work at the DNC. She's still one of the only Latinas on TV. She's one of the only folks who's actually taken a lead on this. And it's something that we all take for granted, but there's not very many of us. And if you think about what she's done, think about the campaign managers and the communication staffers who should work their way up in campaigns to become the communications director for the DNC. There's never any women of color. Right. There's never even any men of color. So having a Latino manage a congressional race that's one of the 10 congressional races in America that has a majority Latino population that's a 50-50 district. You know it, boys and girls. California 22, California 13, California 47, Texas 15. I can go all day. California 8, New Mexico 2. I've got these memorized because this is where I live.
Right.
They all have something in common outside of a few of them, like Gabe Vasquez, is they all have white campaign managers. Yeah. Guess what? They all have white media consultants. Again, it makes none of them bad. They're great campaign managers. And they're great media consultants who've probably been to Maria and my home. Literally our best friends and good friends. But we should be making opportunities for more Latinos to come up to do that work, at least in districts where there's lots of other Latinos. So when Maria says we show up with cultural competency, right, which will help us win back some of this vote, because this is the biggest gaping hole in the strategy and party apparatus. Is in every state party and in most campaigns, there's just not an entry point for a poor working class Latino kid who cares about campaigns to actually make a living doing this work. So they go work for Coca-Cola or Amazon because that's where the money is, so they can pay back their college loans and probably take care of their grandmother who's living in their basement. Right. These are the problems that we need to have real family conversation with. Give me some of your thoughts on that, Maria, before we get out of here.
I couldn't agree more, Chuck. And I will make this pitch that those young Latinos who came up with the understanding of the struggles and of what their families have gone through to make it to where they are the best strategists because they have lived it. You and I have lived it. We understand what's at stake. We understand what works. We understand where the holes are. So, candidates and parties and campaigns would do well to look at these young Latinos and Latinas and see that there is a plethora of talent to, frankly, and I'll make this pitch, Chuck, yes, to be great, to come and lead campaigns for candidates who are running in majority Latino districts. But I will make the case that they will make great campaign managers writ large, overall.
Right.
Because we understand what it takes overall to make the case for one of the toughest electorates that we have seen from the time the Democratic Party became competitive. And you and I have seen this. The pendulum has swung left and right again. We know it's going to swing our way again, but it is going to take strategy. It is going to take smarts. It is going to take a deep understanding of our community and what this country signifies to people who come here looking for a better life.
That's eloquent, and I think that that's spot on. I want to thank everybody for listening this week, and I really want to thank my sister, Maria Cardona, who's always had my back. She's been with me in the trenches. Thank you so much for standing in for Mike Madrid today. You did so much better. I wish I could fire him, but I can't. I'd like to have you full time, but we'll figure out that in the long term.
I would love to be on whenever and wherever you need me, Hermano. I love you, and you're doing such great and important work out there, Chuck, and I look forward to continue to being in the trenches with you.
Thank you so much. And then for all of you listening, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube. Mike Madrid, who I love to give a hard time to, will be back next week. Maybe Andreas, our producer, we could talk about this topic that got me all worked up this morning, which was Democrats and some other groups spending $20 million to study men and figure out how to talk to men. Maybe next week we'll get to that. Until the meantime, if you're lucky enough to still have your mom and daddy, give them a call. If you're likely enough to be around a computer, hit the like and subscribe button on all of the different apparatuses where you get the linear, how you like that, Michael Frias, where you get the linear podcast or the YouTube channel. Until next week, me and Maria Cardona, we're out.
Ciao, ciao, amigos.